So we must do two things, two great things together, to encompass that enormous new view that lies before us, but to encompass it within the framework of science, to see it within the whole categorical framework of science, and to see that these two are not separate, but that they are wedded. The bigness of the idea, the newness of the idea, the greatness of it is one with the structure of science, the structure of being itself.
We come to that great shift from principle to life. What have we really seen in each of our subjects? Every time we have come to a new subject, we have seen that there is a feeding back, a feedback going on, a looping back, haven't we? When we came to the love subtone in mind, there was the demand, the command, the appeal to us to avail ourselves of the rule. And so that was an instruction to feed back to the point of mind as mind and to go through the loop again. And so we did that, and we did it, and we did it until we found that we were actually at the standpoint of spirit, that mind became spirit as we focused on it, as we fed back upon it, as we looked at it again. We saw that the very nature of being is autocatalytic, that it is filled with its own feedback ability, that it is continually feeding back on itself. That's what an autocatalysis is. It's a continual feeding back. We call this in our spiritual language reflection, or a spiritualization process, a birth process. And so we saw that the feedback was enlarged. It was enlarged from mind to spirit, that our loop was mind and spirit, that every time we reached spirit, we fed back to mind, and then went from mind to spirit in that autocatalytic spiritual process of focusing on what we had up to that point. And suddenly we discovered that that took us into the soul standpoint, that by being true to mind and spirit, that we were reformed, that regenerating, isn't that a generating and regenerating process of feeding back between mind and spirit became soul. It became for us the reformation of soul. And then everything that we saw about soul was telling us that we had to feed back to mind and spirit until we came to the conclusion of the matter in soul and found that our new identity, our new steady state, was identified with principle, was an identity with the principle of being. That we had been undergoing the process of self-organization. And so principle, through 7 subtones, shows us the integrity of that self-organization process. And how did it do it? By showing that the principled attitude in us, the self-organization of us, always falls back, feeds back to mind, spirit, soul. That this is principle. Mind, spirit, and soul is principle. And so what we have is a growing complexity of feedback loops. That because of the feedback principle, we evolve. We become more complex. This is also what they see in nature, that in systems that are far from equilibrium, that is to say, systems that are exposed to energy flows, to the flow of energy, to the influx of energy, those dynamic fluctuations, that in such a system, different catalytic reactions begin to combine. And they combine to form in such a way as to overcome and to go right through any instabilities and to form a new steadiness in the system. And in forming that new steadiness, they are also forming complex networks of closed loops. I am telling you that because I want to show you a diagram that tries to express that. Because as these closed loops begin to, as they are catalyzing, each catalytic loop is itself a closed loop, the closed loops begin to catalyze each other. This is actually what we see in the build-up of prayer, is that the individual closed loops, then the individual auto-catalyzing, begin to catalyze each other. The loops catalyze each other, and what comes out is the complexity, the growing complexity in the system, and they call it a hypercycle. So that the self-organized system is a complexity of hypercycles. And I love this particular illustration, which is from Eigen. You remember, I don't know whether you remember that Max spoke about Eigen and his theory of evolution many, many years ago, back in the early 70s, when he took that class in London. It was a beautiful class, and he spoke at that time about divine cybernetics, and he had seen this presentation by Eigen, Dr. Eigen, who was presenting a new theory of evolution, a cybernetic theory of evolution. And this particular illustration is from, I think it's Capra's book, I think it's The Web of Life, and he refers to Eigen, you see there, 1971, and is showing a catalytic network. It happens to be a network of enzymes, and you see that the network of enzymes is beginning to form a closed loop. So the loops reflect each other, they begin to catalyze each other and to form a further closed loop together. The loops form a loop. You have a loop of loops. This is what is happening in the case of a system becoming self-organized, that the loops are interworking and they are interlocking with each other. They are cycles of catalysts, and this belongs to a self-organizing system, and that system is capable of replicating itself, of self-replication, and of correcting any errors in its own replication. That type of a system then has been evolved by passing through all of its instabilities, all the instabilities that have come up in the evolution of it. All the temptations have been passed through and surmounted, and the system creates its own successively higher levels of organization. This is the state of a system then that is far from equilibrium. And you get the new forms of organization appearing. Those forms of organization then are characterized by increasing diversity and richness of their components and structures. So you begin to feel that that principle it must express itself as life. And actually that's the next question that they ask, that the scientists ask once they see what a self-organizing system is and that it is self-organized. Then the next question is, when is a self-organizing system truly alive? You can have a self-organizing system, a dissipative structure that is not considered to be alive, but what renders such a system to be living, to be life-like? And there must be certain properties in the system then to prove that it is actually alive. So what is the precise connection between self-organization and life? That connection, that quality, that character is called autopoiesis. As the self-organized system begins to express autopoiesis, we know that it is living, that it is alive. So we come in our subject to the subject of life, the prayer of life. So we need to see again now what autopoiesis is. The key characteristic of a living network is that it continually produces itself. This is autopoiesis. Autopoiesis is referred to as the pattern of life. They say of an autopoietic system that the being and the doing of it, this is beautiful because this is really what we will see in the life, the prayer of life, and in the prayer of truth, that the being of it in life and the doing of it in truth are inseparable. This is a living system. And this is their specific mode of organization, that the being and doing cannot be separated. Autopoiesis, as we said, means self-making, that the system has all of the components within itself now to sustain itself, to make itself, to produce or create more of itself. It is a network pattern in which the function of each component is to participate in the production or transformation of every other component in the network. In this way, the network continually causes itself. It is its own cause and effect. It doesn't have to go outside of itself. It is, so to say, self-contained, has everything within itself to create itself, to cause and affect itself. It is produced by its own components, and in turn, the network produces these components. You remember that we saw that earlier this week?
Isn't that autocatalytic?
No,
No.
but autocatalysis is embraced in now the autopoiesis. It is included in. Remember what we said, we never really leave the autocatalysis behind. It's always present at every new standpoint. Just as if you were to think of the quality and nature of spirit, that when you go further to soul, you never leave spirit behind. When you go to principle, life, truth, and love, you never leave spirit behind. That quality is there. So all of the changes in the system take place within the system. The system never goes outside of itself for cause and effect, as we said. And the system is organized circularly, in a circular way. Living systems are organized in closed, causal, circular processes. What does that mean? It only means that life is what? Life is mind, spirit, soul, principle. This is life. That you can't start with life, but life is mind, spirit, soul, principle. And so to make more of itself as it turns back and feeds back on itself, on mind, spirit, soul, principle, this is bringing out more life, more and more and more of itself. The system is self-causing its own effect. And thus circular organization is the basic organization of all living systems. Just remember that now. Closed, causal, circular processes. And we come to the fifth subject of life.
Could you say that one more time? Closed.
Circular, causal processes. So coming to the subject of life, to my present understanding, we are looking at the divine self-organizing principle as the redundancy principle of life, or the principle of autopoiesis. Shall we try to sort this out a little bit more? Okay. First of all, in autocatalysis, this means that you have a catalyst in the system. Now, what does a catalyst do? It takes, first of all, you have to have present in the system that which you want to have at the end. Okay? You have to have however little of this substance or this nature in the system has to be there. And that's what you want to eventuate in becoming the nature of the system as a whole. So it's a transformation process. Maybe you can help me, Bill, if I go off the track. And so the catalyst will change, will transform the system into that substance which it is catalyzing. It catalyzes through feedback loops, through feedback. Actually, autocatalysis reflects the positive feedback. It amplifies that which may be there only as a little seed, that seed within consciousness, that remnant, that kingdom of heaven within you, however minute that may be, that is catalyzed until it becomes the sum and substance of the system. And the catalyst, therefore, changes the system without itself being changed. It itself is not changed. Now, in a physical system, you can have a catalyst that is different from the substance, that it is catalyzing. But in the divine system, the divine nature is itself its own catalyst. So it is the substance and the catalyst of itself. It catalyzes itself until it overtakes the system and becomes the whole of it. Okay? Now we saw this primarily focused in the tone of spirit, where it's, actually right at the close in the attractor of mind, when we came to that which says, the rule is established, avail yourself of the rule. The substance, the nature is established, avail yourself of that. In other words, go back to it. Go back to it. This is a process of catalyzing, to go back to that which you have in order to cause it to grow, to enlarge, and to take over the whole system. Okay? Now, I don't know whether you noticed, but we came, actually that autocatalysis, I think, is hinted at already in mind as spirit. There's some touch there. I can't remember exactly what it is, but yeah, there's a hinting toward the autocatalysis. We feel it coming in mind as love, and then spirit focuses that whole thing. The tone of spirit is filled with all of that within us, which is autocatalytic. Remember, we took that. We said, now, these things, these attitudes, these qualities within you are autocatalytic. These are not. These are not. That was all focused in the spirit tone. Betty says, what class was that? But then, with each new tone, main tone, and subtone that we looked at here and there, even though I didn't always mention it, the sense of autocatalysis was still there. And it was always there with the new tone that said, what am I as the new tone? How can you have me as your standpoint? You have to go back to the previous tones. You see? So you have to be a dynamic, autocatalytic process, and that is what is unfolding the whole thing. What is leading you from spirit to soul, from soul to principle, principle to life, life to truth, truth to love. That autocatalysis comes up throughout. But we see when we come to principle how those four tones have been looping back, feeding back on themselves. That's the autocatalysis, in order to bring out more, to cause the growth forward. It's this, the loop of mind, and we stay in the loop of mind, and all of a sudden we find we're in the loop of spirit. And we stay in the loop of mind and spirit, and all of a sudden we find that we're in soul, and that soul is mind and spirit, see? And when we're true to the loop, the feedback loop of mind, spirit, and soul, suddenly we find that this is the principle. This is a principle. That principle is mind, spirit, and soul. Principle is nothing but mind, spirit, and soul. Soul is nothing in and of itself but mind and spirit, if we want to use a reductionist way of looking at it. That spirit is nothing but mind, going over and over and over mind. What mind is, that's spirit. You see here? So as we went along, it keeps getting more and more complex. It's what we would call a snowball effect. The snowball goes down the hill and starts out very small, keeps picking up more and more snow until it becomes a huge thing. It is that kind of thing that is happening with the autocatalysis and with the development of the tones, the main tones, the prayers, right? And so as we came to principle, we actually found that principle is all of these many feedback relationships going on at once and feeding on each other. And that when a system reaches that level of complexity, it is called self-organized. It is then self-organized. And in our divine subject, we see that we have become organized like our principle. It's the relationship that you see to the point of soul in the word order, that soul is identity, yes, identity. But identity with what? What is soul identified with? It's identified with principle. Its identity is with principle. So it's one creative principle now as a self-organizing principle with a self-organized system of itself, isomorphic with itself, and that system is a dynamic complexity. It is a hypercycle, if you want to say that, is characterized by hypercycles, or that it has within it that autocatalytic set, which is continually feeding on itself, feeding on itself. And so actually they would say that that system is alive, it is a living system when it exhibits autopoiesis, namely that it has everything within itself to sustain, to support itself, to make itself like making like, meaning like causing like. That's everything that we know about life, of the self-existency of life, the self-supporting of life, the self-sustaining of life, that life has everything within itself to sustain itself, maintain itself, promote itself. Isn't that life? That's different than causing itself to grow. That's different. It's the result of a fundamental growth of the system to the point of becoming self-organized. And then that state of self-organization can dynamically cause itself and affect itself. So all of the components of that network support each other, participate in making each other and in making the whole network. And the network makes the components. So you have a continual inner activity of self-causing and self-affecting, which is a maintenance, a self-maintenance.